Welcome back everyone to another video with Scruffy Tales, and today we are going back to the Cold War. And in this video we're gonna briefly cover a famous incident that took place in the fall of 1981 when Sweden almost ended up in a war with the Soviet Union. Right, so here we have Sweden and we can see the Baltic Sea, we have Russia way off to the east, and between Lithuania and Poland we have the Russian enclave of Kaliningrad, where they, throughout the Cold War, had the full might of their Baltic Sea fleet stationed along with a powerful presence of the Air Force. And Kaliningrad and the south of Sweden is what we will be focusing on here because, like I said, back in 1981, the south of the Baltic Sea and the south of Sweden was the stage of a very dire situation indeed. So here we have in red Kaliningrad and in blue Karlskrona, a Swedish town, and also the location of a very important Swedish Navy base. And it has been vital for the Swedish Navy for years and centuries. And messing around with Google Maps, I couldn't help myself. So I zoomed in on Karlskrona, and here you have this surrounding archipelago. But I also zoomed in on the base itself. Take a look at this. This is insane. It's zooming in on the Visby corvettes located at the docks. Military secrets are, free for everyone to inspect and zoom in on. Incredible. Anyway. Moving on with the important stuff. So, October of 1981. Shortly after a massive Soviet military exercise in and around the Baltic called, I believe it was Zapad, which I think is Russian for West. So you can imagine what that exercise was all about. So shortly after Zapad, this massive Soviet Union exercise in and around the Baltic, a submarine in the Soviet Navy called S-363 and in Sweden called the U137 headed out to sea. A class of submarine that NATO has identified as Whiskey class. The image here depicting the submarine is not a Whiskey class. I think it's one of their massive Atlantic deep sea submarines, but it's standing in for the Whiskey class. Anyway, so what happens is in and around this time, Sweden is testing a new torpedo at Karlskrona, the Navy base I just showed you, indicated here with the arrow. So U-137 sets out to sea from Kaliningrad, and it's on a mission to gather intelligence on this new torpedo. And it's bringing with it, probably, as far as we know, a team of Spetsnaz, elite soldiers, who are highly, in this case, this team is specifically trained on gathering intelligence on technical equipment, such as a torpedo. In total, the Soviet Union sends 3 larger submarines around the Whiskey class size, as well as a mini submarine for sneaky stuff. And they head out to sea. They head for Bornholm, this large island you can see on the map. That belongs to Denmark. They make a right turn and head north towards Sweden and Karlskrona. And I just realized they are working their asses off outdoors here. Sorry for that if you pick that up. So, U137 enters Swedish territorial waters and has planned to head into the archipelago to avoid detection. And they're kind of smart about it because these submarines, they can't go, it's, shallow waters, so they need to be on the surface. So they do this at night and just pop up enough to breach the surface of the ocean with the tower, and they actually light up certain lights on the submarine so that the radar cross-section and any visual confirmations from afar make it seem as if it's a fishing boat, right? It's a small object, and if you look at it in the dark, you can see lights on it, so you think, it's a fishing boat. Kind of clever, to be honest. However, along the way, as you can see here with the exclamation mark, they mess up, and they mess up big time. And it's not because anyone was drunk. That's the, usually when people talk about this incident, it is, oh, the captain was drunk. He was not drunk. They had technical equipment that was supposed to help them guide their way through the archipelago. They had sea charts and everything. They messed up. And they messed up big time. But not because anyone was drunk. They actually hit shallows. They ran right up on a rock and got stuck. And they got stuck big time. And so as you can see here, you have U137's location marked here on Google Maps. It says grundstötningsplats, and how do you translate that? Well, that's when they grundstötning, hitting shoals, hitting reefs, I guess you can call that. And you even can see here minstation. That's mine station, sea mines. So the army, the navy had outposts on these islands, and the submarine hit ground, I don't know, a couple of 100 meters away from a navy outpost. Yeah, so they messed up big time. The thing is, fishermen spotted the submarine early morning, and then they reported into the Navy and said, do you know there's a submarine stuck on a rock out in the archipelago? And the Navy at first didn't believe them. They were like, nah, this is not happening. So when they eventually, a couple of hours later, yeah, okay, we have to go out there and take a look. And they find the submarine stuck on a rock, and they couldn't believe it. And, in true Swedish fashion, the officer on the first captain on site, moved up to the submarine and basically knocked on the door and asked them, are you okay here? And then realized, Jesus Christ, they're Russian, they're Soviets. And reported it back in. And that's when the circus began. Oh my God. And here you actually have a image of the actual submarine stuck on the rock out at sea, right off the island here. And so what did Sweden do? Well, the armed forces went into high alert, obviously, and quickly gathered kustjägare, and they're like elite Marines, more or less. They're not Marine soldiers, they're more like, Rangers, but the Marine version. And they were deployed to the area. They brought with them machine guns and Carl Gustav launchers and everything, and set up shop on the islands surrounding the submarine. And it's kind of funny because they were apparently given orders to wear their berets and not helmets, because it would look better in the media if they had berets on. They would look cooler. And the Coast Jaegers themselves, they were like, what? What kind of an order is that? But that's the order they got, apparently. I think that's a fun side note. Uh, anyway, on a more important note, though, they were there for a reason. They were there to obviously secure the submarine, but they also had orders to help any Soviet sailor that was trying to defect. So if they spotted a Soviet sailor bailing the submarine and trying to swim ashore, if any Soviet officer or sailor tried to stop them or shoot at them as they were swimming, the Swedish Coast Jaegers had orders to shoot to kill the still loyal Soviet sailors in order to help the ones trying to defect reach shore. Isn't that incredible? I don't think many people realize that. And also, people saw the need for potentially having to board this submarine. So other Coast Jaegers were training on how to storm and board the submarine. And they were off at a facility somewhere. I don't remember if they trained on a Swedish submarine or if they built a mock-up. I don't remember what they did there, but I know they trained to board the submarine. What they realized was, though, that a submarine is cramped, it's tiny, and you can't really avoid casualties if people start throwing hand grenades or shooting automatic fire down these narrow corridors of the submarine. People would be hit no matter what you did. But the Army and Navy at the time didn't have bulletproof vests. They had flak vests because they were prepared to deal with artillery, mainly. So what did they do? They had to go to the Swedish police to borrow bulletproof vests and, the old classic helmets we see the police using in riot control and stuff like that from the 70s. So that's what the Coast Jaegers got from the police, and that's what they used to train with as they prepared to potentially storm the submarine. And keep in mind, if the Coast Jaegers had stormed the submarine, and they didn't know this at the time, they would have faced a team of Spetsnaz who were still on board the submarine. What a showdown that would have made. Holy hell. Eventually, tests were made in and around the submarine because Swedish authorities, they were concerned that they knew that these submarines could carry nuclear weapons. So they wanted to know what's on board here. So experts got into a small boat and started circling the submarine. At one point, they even set up shop on the Navy vessel attached to the submarine in secret and took readings from the submarine. And they found that, yes, the submarine was emitting radioactivity that was usually associated with nuclear warheads. And as you can imagine, now an international incident had evolved into an international crisis. A Soviet submarine had violated Swedish sovereignty, Swedish territorial waters, equipped with nuclear weapons. And these warheads, they could be used, with torpedoes, as you might expect, but they could also be used as mines. And that means bombs, explosives. They could be set off by anyone. So this was now a really dangerous situation. Because if Sweden tried to storm the submarine, who knows? They might actually detonate the warheads. No, I mean, the probability might not have been high, but it was definitely a possibility. So Sweden had, you know, a nuclear bomb on their hands, basically, that could go off at any moment if someone messed up politically or locally, militarily. And to make matters even worse, the Soviet Union decided to increase the stakes even more. I mean, there were nuclear weapons there, but that wasn't enough. The Soviet Union deployed a squadron of 12 warships from Kaliningrad, and they headed straight towards Karlskrona with orders to retrieve the submarine. And they brought with them one search and rescue vessel, but also another team of Spetsnaz to help out with this rescue operation. And this time, it wasn't a sneaky intelligence gathering mission. This time it was enter Swedish waters with a small fleet intent on relying on military force to flex Soviet Union muscles. That is a declaration of war. And as this happened, as this warships they were crossing the Baltic Sea, confrontation was inevitable. Swedish Navy helicopters, they spotted several Soviet submarines moving in Swedish waters. One was spotted leaving, and eyewitnesses that saw it leaving attest to that it was definitely another Whiskey-class submarine. Potentially even more nuclear warheads in Swedish waters. The search and rescue vessel that the Soviets brought with them steamed ahead of the warships. And it was obvious that it had orders to reach the submarine well ahead of the Swedish Navy and anyone else. And, free it from the rock and tow it back to safety. What Sweden did in response to this was give orders to one of its own submarines to intercept the search and rescue vessel. Ding! Neighbor at the door. So anyway, yeah. Swedish submarine intercepts the Soviet search and rescue vessel. And the search and rescue vessel was actually inside Swedish territorial waters, about to enter the archipelago and go after a submarine. But the Swedish submarine surfaced and made damn sure that we are here and we will not let you go any further into the archipelago. So the search and rescue vessel turned around and headed back to sea. It has been later revealed that the Soviet Spetsnaz team that was brought along had orders to board and commandeer a Swedish search and rescue vessel that was located in the area, and then use that one to free U137 and tow it back to Kaliningrad. So it was clear that the Soviets, they were intent on using force to make Sweden give up the submarine that was stuck in the Swedish archipelago. And this is when things got really, really scary. When it was clear that the Soviet Union was heading towards Sweden with 12 warships, intent on forcefully retrieving their submarine. The armed forces explained the situation to the Swedish Prime Minister, and he gave the armed forces armed forces a single order, a single command: Håll gränsen, hold the border. And the armed forces responded. Viggen fighter jets armed with anti-ship missiles were deployed to the skies with orders to sink Soviet warships. And the coast artillery went into high alert, preparing to destroy any Soviet vessel entering into Swedish waters. And they even went so far as to push into service a new targeting and tracking system that had not yet been officially cleared for service. And they were, as it happened, they were testing 2 of these new tracking systems in the area where the submarine had gotten itself stuck in. So they pushed these 2 systems into service ahead of time. And the Soviet squadron was closing in on Swedish waters. But the Soviet squadron commander, he realized that something was wrong, something was off, because all of a sudden, Swedish radar stations went silent and appeared to shut down. Now, what he didn't know, but later found out, was that Sweden had initiated systems that were only meant for war. Sweden went in to war mode. Sweden was intent on starting a war if the Soviets entered into Swedish waters. And part of the system was this new technology that was able to track and lock on to enemy warships without the enemy being able to locate those systems or track them. And realizing that something was wrong and that the Swedes were more than likely planning on sinking his fleet, the Soviet commander contacted his superiors at Kaliningrad. 400 meters from Swedish territorial waters, a distance covered in only 30 seconds, the Soviet warships came to a full stop after the Soviet commander had received orders from Kaliningrad to not enter into Swedish waters. He reported back that Sweden was prepared to sink all of his ships, and it took a while, but eventually he got the orders to stand down. The Swedish armed forces had the finger on the trigger, and it was only 30 seconds away from them opening fire on the Soviet warships and starting a full-scale war. Thankfully, cooler heads prevailed in the end, and diplomacy ensured that not a single shot was fired, and in the end, the submarine was eventually held back to international waters by the Swedish Navy and escorted to international waters where the Soviet Union could then take over and help the submarine back to port in Kaliningrad. And the incident would become known as Whiskey on the Rocks, very cleverly so. And when it was over, thankfully, it had not escalated into a devastating conflict. There was a moment, though, where things really got close to shots being fired. Swedish radar picked up 2 ships that left the Soviet squadron, and they headed for the Swedish border. But before anyone managed to take the decision to open fire, it was revealed or concluded that these 2 ships were not Soviet warships. They were, in fact, German fishermen. And wouldn't that be something for the history books if a war between Sweden and the Soviet Union started because German fishermen happened to, mind their own business and just went straight through a conflict area. To finish it off, diplomacy deserves all the praise for ensuring that this did not get out of hand. Diplomacy was, crucial and vital to avoid any deaths or for this entire incident to escalate into a proper war. But on a final note, we must not forget why diplomacy was given a chance to prevail. It was because the Swedish armed forces, Swedish soldiers, sailors and pilots stood ready on the ramparts, prepared to face down the might of the Soviet Union and sink anything that crossed into Swedish waters. Thank you for watching and listening, and I hope you found this interesting. And if you're a Swede, remember, håll gränsen.